What it do, what it do, what it do. What's up, guys? Fresh off college football week 13, I want to say. Can't really remember. But fresh off of this week's college football slate, I'm going to give you some takes. First one, I want to start off with something that I've been hearing a lot this weekend, especially after yesterday. A lot of people are comparing this Notre Dame team the 2012 team that got blown out by Alabama in the national title game. I'm here to tell you that that is not the case. This is a completely different team. It's a completely different team. So I did a deep dive, did some research for you to, help me back up and prove my point that this is a different team. First off, QB play way better this year for this Notre Dame team than it was in 2012. If you remember 2012, they had Tommy Rees and Everett Golson. Tommy Rees was supposed to be the starter. He had some team troubles, violated team guidelines or whatnot. Missed the first game. Golson started. It was his from there on out. However, in big late game situations, Tommy Rees would come in and relieve Golson. Golson didn't exactly play great this in the 2012 year when they went to the national title game. He was kind of inconsistent, kind of erratic, kind of similar to how Ian Book played maybe his first year as a starter with Notre Dame, or maybe even last year if you want to point at that. Not the case this year. Ian Book's been very consistent. 12 touchdowns, only one pick. Playing pretty good. Over 2,000 yards, 9 games in. He's averaging well over 200 yards per game passing. So I think quarterback play, for one, way more consistent. Everett Golson was also a sophomore. Ian Book's a senior, so he's got all this experience. He's been in these big game situations, and that matters, especially coming down the stretch, and especially going into a big game like a playoff game or BCS national title game. That matters. Next, Tyler Eifert. Tyler Eifert was Notre Dame's best receiver that year. Tyler Eifert. He's a tight end. Outside of him, they didn't really have any playmakers on the outside. You know what Brian Kelly's done since then? He's made sure he's gotten playmakers. Yes, one of their best receivers this year is also a tight end, Michael Mayer. True freshman, he's very good. But their best receiver is, in fact, a wide receiver, McKinley. Guy's a unique, dynamic threat down the field, and he's a big body. He can go up and catch jump balls. You also have other receivers on the outside that are pretty dynamic as well. They've got some bigger guys. They've got other tight ends they can throw to. The point is they have a flurry of receivers that they can get the ball to. It's not just one guy. Tyler Eifert was their leading receiver that entire year. Everett Golson, Tommy Rees, didn't matter. They had to go to Eifert. He was really one of their only guys. Their running game is more consistent. They had a pretty good line back in 2012, not going to lie. Rodney Stanley, Zach Martin, Nick Martin. I think Mike Golick Jr., if I'm not mistaken, was also part of that offensive line. Brian Kelly, all he has done in his time as a coach is recruit really, really solid offensive lines. His time in Cincinnati, he recruited solid offensive lines. Time in Notre Dame, he's done that. Quentin Nelson's another guy. Comes off the top of my head. Guy was a stud at Notre Dame, stud in the pros. He puts almost an offensive lineman into the pros every year. Guy produces great talent at the offensive line level. Another thing with that defense, it was front seven heavy. And by that, I mean it was the front seven. You had Louis Nix. You had Stephon Tuitt, love him, Pittsburgh Steeler. Manti Te'o. You had a lot of talent up front for this Notre Dame team in 2012. I would argue this team that Notre Dame has this year. Their defense is better up front in the front seven, but not only that, they've got playmakers in the secondary as well. They missed Kyle Hamilton this weekend and didn't even really seem like it. Going against one of the best quarterbacks in probably the country, not only the ACC, but probably the country, in Sam Howell. And they still look pretty damn good. Kyle Hamilton's a good safety. He missed this game. He's probably the best playmaker in the secondary. He missed this game. Notre Dame's defense didn't miss a step. Dalen Hayes is probably their anchor up front. They've got some other seniors up front on that line that are good. Awusa Koromoa, linebacker, very good, flies all around the field, makes plays nonstop. Very good anchor in that linebacker. The thing is, they've got anchors everywhere on the defensive side, and this is a very senior-heavy team. Very senior-heavy, not only on offense, but on defense. I mean, Hamilton Sr., Koromoa Sr., Dalen Hayes Sr. They've got two more seniors on the defensive line. They've got another senior linebacker. They've got two more seniors in the secondary at least. They might even have more. I didn't go through the entire roster, but I went through enough to know that. I mean, this is a senior-heavy team. Stephon Tuitt, for as good as he was that year, he was a sophomore. Louis Nix was a junior. Manti Te'o was a senior. Their secondary was young, though. Mention it again, Everett Golson was a sophomore. So it's not like this Notre Dame team in 2012 had all the experience in the world. Another big difference. The Notre Dame team in 2012 played in 5 one-score games. In those one-score games, it wasn't just good teams. It was bad teams. It was average teams. It was everything in between. They had 3 true blowout wins. 3 true, I say. And this year, they've had 1 true one. But they've played a tougher schedule. And not only that, they've only played 2 one-score games this year. 2 one-score games. That means end of the game was not really in question. You're coming down clutch pressure situation. The game wasn't really in question. Whereas in 2012, you had 5 of them. You had 5 games where it was like, oh no, what's going to happen? Is this going to happen? I believe they played 3 overtimes in the regular season. They played overtime once. It was against Clemson. Yeah, they didn't have Trevor Lawrence, but they had DJ. DJ played one hell of a game. I think that's a big difference too. Is the only other one-score game was against Louisville, and that in my mind, teams slip up every now and then, and throw that one as a wash. Throw it away as a wash. And Alabama came close against Ole Miss. That's a wash for them. Ohio State almost slipped up. Let Indiana get back into things. Throw that one out as a wash. Clemson against BC. Throw that one out as a wash. It happens. These teams have washes. They have slip-ups. They have games where, oh no, we didn't exactly start out on the right foot. It happens. The other close game was Clemson, like I said. Clemson's a very good team. There's no problem playing Clemson to a close game. They played Stanford in 2012 to a close game. Stanford went on to be 12-2. It's not a bad one. BYU, close game. BYU went on to go 8-5. It's, an average. Played a close game against played a decent game against USC. USC wasn't USC. They went on to go 8-5. Played a close one against Michigan State against Michigan. Neither one of those teams was great that year. So my point in that is the teams they were playing that year, they were playing the close games, they weren't great teams. They went to triple overtime, I think, against Pitt. And Pitt was like 7-6 that year or something like that. Not a great team. Okay, yes, the Louisville one was a slip up. That happens. It's over. It's not consistently happening. It's not on a consistent basis. Last week, everybody's like, oh, they just beat Clemson. Now they're playing Boston College. Watch out for a slip up. Wasn't really a slip up. 45-31. I would argue they should have won by more. This week against North Carolina, 31-17. Guess what? North Carolina came into that game averaging over 560 yards of offense per game. Over 350 yards through the air, over 200 yards rushing. They had two, not one, but two running backs in the top 15 rushing yards per game. Guess what? Not a single running back. This team didn't sniff over 100 yards. Didn't even sniff it. Weren't even close. Like I said, not one, but two running backs in the top 15 of the entire NCAA. Two. Sam Howell, very good quarterback. He had to make amazing throws. In the first quarter, he was making amazing throw after amazing throw. Didn't hold up throughout the game. Notre Dame started to have their way. They held this team, North Carolina, team averaging over 560 yards of total offense before this game, under 300 yards of total offense. That's pretty impressive. Clemson ran the ball for 34 yards against Notre Dame. Clemson has one of the most dynamic running backs in the game in Travis Etienne. They had 34 yards rushing as a team. Etienne had a good game, but it was receiving. They weren't going to let him beat him on the ground. That's insane. I'm going to do some stat comparisons for you to further my point about Notre Dame. They are better this year than in 2012. If you're afraid that Notre Dame's going to get blown out, or you're saying Notre Dame's going to get blown out, it's the same Notre Dame, I will back it up even further. Offensively, they average 412 offensive yards per game compared to 463 offensive yards per game this year. That 412 in 2012 is very misleading. They had 3 games, like I said, that they blew teams out. Majority of their offense came from those 3 games. They had 4 games where they had under 300 yards of total offense. You know how many times that's happened for them this year? 1 time. Just 1 time. Defensive yards per game. This is the big one. 305 defensive yards per game compared to 303 defensive yards per game this year. Okay, that's pretty similar. Not much you can do about that. Scoring defense, they're pretty similar. Again, here's the thing. They had a higher turnover rate on offense and defense. So it tells me 2 things. They couldn't take care of the ball, but they also tended to rely on turnovers to help them spark things offensively. And it tells me they're less reliant on turnovers this year in order to spark an offense. They don't necessarily need turnovers. And it also tells me they can get teams to punt without force, or give the ball back to them without forcing turnovers. They don't need turnovers to win a football game. Turnover is nice. Any team will like a turnover, but they don't need it. The Notre Dame team in 2012 needed it way more. We'll move on. We'll go to passing yards per game. 222 offensive passing yards per game. Okay, it's not terrible. 234 passing yards per game this year. Okay, there's not a big difference, but when you look at the game breakdown, they're more consistently over 200 yards. There's been one or two times this year where in book has been under 200 yards passing. Whereas in 2012, there's about 5 or 6 occasions where Notre Dame as a team was under 200 yards passing. That's not good. Defensive passing, 199 in 2012 compared to 218 per game in 2020. I don't think that's that big of a difference. That's just a little bit of inflation because it is that much more passing oriented of a league now. More teams are going to be passing. This is a big one, too. Offensive rushing yards per game. 2012, 189. Okay. 2020, 229. They're one of the best running teams in the nation because they have a very dominant offensive line. They also have a very dynamic running back in Kieran Williams. Back in 2012, they had 3 running backs split timeshare. Kerry Wood, Theo Riddick, and Atkinson. I think it was Charles Atkinson. They had 3 running backs split a timeshare. None of them really took over. None of them were really lead back. Kyron Williams for Notre Dame this year, sophomore out of St. Louis, Missouri. Shout out to Lou 314. Has been the main back the entire way. He's been the lead back the entire way. The guy's averaging over 100 yards per game. He's their go-to guy. And their offensive line is very good again. Defensive rushing yards per game, 105 in 2012, 85 in 2020. I'll repeat that again, 85 rushing yards per game. That's outstanding. That is outstanding. I understand it's a little more pass-happy of a league, but 85 yards rushing per game, you also have more athletic quarterbacks, and they take into account scrambling yards and all that as rushing yards. You know, a guy like Trevor Lawrence averages like 30 yards rushing per game because he's a good athlete. A guy like Sam Howell averages 20 yards rushing per game, probably because he's a good athlete. These quarterbacks are good athletes. So the rushing yards, yes, while it might be more of a pass-happy league, it's also a more athletic league now than it was. Your quarterbacks are more athletic. They're able to run around a little more. Guess what? It doesn't matter. Notre Dame's not allowing rushing yards. They gave up 5 100 rushing performances to teams in 2012. This year, it's only happened twice. Only twice. Only twice. I think this might be more impressive. In 2012, they gave up over 300 passing yards just once. This year, they've done it, given it up just once. The game against Clemson. Other than that, they have not allowed a team to throw over 300 yards passing against them. Notre Dame is very, 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 very good. This team is unique, very dynamic, and I don't know if Clemson gets some of these defensive guys back on their defense, like Skalski, like we saw today, Skalski made a difference. Some of these other guys, too, they need to get back on defense, but little unknown about them. But I don't think it's crazy. And I think it's almost like certain at this point that Notre Dame, out of the top 4 teams right now, Bama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State. Notre Dame has the best defense of the four. Alabama's not as dynamic as we're used to seeing. Not as many playmakers as we're used to seeing. Not saying they're bad. Not even saying they're average. They're still very good. Notre Dame's is better. Notre Dame's is more experienced. Ohio State's is pretty bad. If they gave up what they did to Indiana, it's pretty bad. They don't have the playmakers in the secondary. Clemson's a little shaky too. They're a little young up front. Things like that. I think it's pretty certain Notre Dame's got the best defense, and I think they've probably got the best offensive line of the four as well. And I don't think that's crazy to say when you think and consider all the offensive linemen that they've produced over the last 5-10 years with Brian Kelly as their head coach. This Notre Dame team is legit. I'm tired of people making the comparison of them to the 2012 Notre Dame team. It's not the same team. It's a different team. It's a more experienced team. This team's not going to get blown out in the college football playoff. And I hope that Notre Dame and Clemson space out in the rankings to where one plays Bama, the other plays Ohio State or Cincy or A&M or whoever. Because I think you'd get two ACC teams in the championship game. I think Notre Dame's that good. I think Clemson's that good. I don't think that's that crazy to say if you actually look at what's happened, take a look at the stats, and then also if you watch Notre Dame play, your eyeballs will tell you this team is very good. They're legit. Respect Notre Dame. Respect them. Their last two games are against Wake Forest and Syracuse. I doubt they give up over 21 points to either team. Notre Dame's going to be in the ACC championship game. They're going to play Trevor Lawrence and Clemson, and they're going to give them everything they've got because this team is legit. Thank you. That is all for this segment. Stay tuned, and I'll talk about Ohio State and the state of the Big Ten next.